Winter could push ancient humans toward the unthinkable, when snow buried edible plants and animals grew thin or vanished. There was no supermarket, emergency shelter, or polite little app announcing that dinner had been canceled. Cold attacked the body, hunger attacked judgment, and darkness gave every distant growl excellent timing. To survive, people burned whatever would burn, stripped carcasses to the last useful scrap, and sometimes left marks on human bones that still make archaeologists uncomfortable. But dark methods does not mean prehistoric people spent every winter behaving like movie villains. Some practices are supported by hard evidence, some are reasonable reconstructions, and a few famous claims remain highly disputed. So we are going to follow the evidence: cut marks, shattered bones, hearth ash, hide-working tools, and shelters that survived long after their builders disappeared. The real story is grim in places. It is also far smarter than the word caveman suggests. First, forget the idea of one universal ancient winter. Human groups lived across hundreds of thousands of years, from relatively mild valleys to ice age plains, where wind could turn exposed skin into an emergency. Their bodies could acclimatize, but biology alone was not enough. Wind stole the thin layer of warmth around the skin, wet clothing accelerated heat loss, and a cold night could become fatal long before the thermometer reached a number that looks dramatic on screen. The safest strategy was prevention. Choose a protected camp, block the wind, stay dry, keep fuel close, and avoid sweating during hard travel. That sounds sensible because it is. The darker part was the price. Warmth required animal skins, animal fat, constant labor, and often a fire that had to be defended through the night. If any link failed, the cold did not offer customer support. One of the oldest clues comes from Schöningen in Germany, where cut marks on bare foot bones dating to roughly 300,000 years ago fit the careful removal of hides. Feet contain little meat, so delicate cuts there are difficult to explain as a search for lunch. The likely prize was the skin, possibly taken with thick fur still attached. That does not prove every bear was killed for a winter coat, but it shows early humans understood that a dangerous animal could become insulation. Later, people scraped hides, pierced them with awls, and eventually used eyed bone needles capable of joining fitted layers. A loose hide draped over the shoulders helps. A garment closed around the wrists, neck, and waist helps much more because it traps warm air and blocks wind. The production line was unpleasant: skinning, scraping away flesh, working greasy hide, drying it, and repairing tears before they became icy vents. Fashion began with a strict dress code: do not freeze. Shelter created another bargain. Caves could block rain and wind, but they were damp, dark, difficult to ventilate, and frequently attractive to animals with larger teeth. Many prehistoric people also used rock overhangs, brush huts, windbreaks, tents, and other structures that rarely preserve well. At some later Ice Age sites in Eastern Europe, circles of mammoth bones are often interpreted as parts of substantial structures, although their exact functions remain debated. Imagine collecting building material that once held up an animal weighing several tons. That is sustainable architecture only if your definition of sustainable is extremely patient. Inside a small shelter, bodies, hides, bedding, and a hearth could create a warmer pocket of air. They could also create fleas, damp fur, stale smoke, and almost no personal space. Winter housing was not cozy because it looked rustic. It worked because every barrier slowed the escape of heat. Then there was fire, the closest thing prehistory had to a life support machine. Earlier traces of burning exist, but archaeologists still debate when different human populations began making and using fire habitually. In Europe, evidence becomes far more common around the Middle Pleistocene, and later caves contain repeated hearths showing that fire was a planned part of camp life. It provided heat, light, cooked food, predator deterrence, and a place where work and social life could continue after sunset. But a hearth consumed fuel without sympathy. In treeless or heavily used landscapes, people gathered small branches, brush, and whatever combustible material was available. At some Paleolithic sites, burned animal bone appears to have supplemented wood. Fresh, fatty bone can contribute energy, especially when mixed with other fuel, although it is not a magical log that burns forever. Right. The grim efficiency is obvious. The animal could feed you, clothe you, build around you, and finally burn beneath you. Fire also created a new survival job: keeping fire alive. Starting a flame in wind or damp conditions is much harder than casually adding another branch to a healthy hearth. Someone had to gather fuel before the storm, protect embers, manage sparks near dry hides, and wake when the fire sank too low. A poorly ventilated shelter filled with smoke and carbon monoxide did not wait for humans to understand chemistry. Move the hearth toward the entrance, and more heat escaped. Move it deeper inside, and breathing became the trade. Researchers can reconstruct ancient combustion from ash, charcoal, altered sediment, and microscopic plant remains, but they cannot interview the person whose eyes watered all night. The method was not dark because fire was sinister. It was dark because survival demanded a controlled hazard in the middle of the room. The safest flame was also the flame you could not afford to lose. Cold was only the first enemy. Hunger often began months before the first blizzard because winter survival depended on decisions made while the landscape was still generous. Groups tracked migrating herds, chose camps near dependable water and fuel, repaired tools, prepared hides, and tried to carry food forward in time. Large prey offered an enormous return, but approaching a horse, bison, reindeer, or mammoth with a wooden weapon was not grocery shopping with extra cardio. It was a coordinated gamble. Wooden hunting weapons and butchered animal remains show that early humans possessed planning, skill, and knowledge passed between generations. A successful kill produced meat, fat, marrow, hide, sinew, bone, and organs. A failed hunt produced a long walk home and an awkward silence around the hearth. In winter, the difference could decide who was still alive by spring. The most valuable part of a cold season carcass was not always the biggest pile of meat. Fat carries far more energy per gram than protein, and very lean meat cannot safely provide unlimited calories on its own. That made marrow a buried treasure. People smashed long bones with hammerstones, opened dense shafts, and scraped out the fatty tissue inside. When easier marrow was gone, some groups may have crushed spongy bone ends into small fragments and heated them to render additional grease. Experimental archaeology shows why fragment size matters, but identifying grease production at a specific ancient site remains difficult. Not every shattered bone is a prehistoric soup recipe. Still, intensive breakage reveals a powerful idea. An apparently empty bone could contain enough remaining energy to justify more work. The carcass was processed twice, first as food, then almost as a locked container. Waste was a luxury winter rarely permitted. Preserving food was another way to make time obey. Freezing temperatures could protect meat, while drying and smoking could slow spoilage under the right conditions. Hunter-gatherers also used caches in many later cultures, but direct evidence becomes difficult in deep prehistory because baskets, hide bags, wooden racks, and the food itself usually disappear. So archaeologists must separate what was possible from what a particular site actually proves. Storage also had enemies. Thawing could rot meat. Moisture could invite mold. Carnivores could locate a cache, and another hungry group might decide that ownership was a summer concept. People may have returned to find weeks of food scattered across the snow. At that point, the choices narrowed quickly: chew older scraps, break less desirable bones, hunt in dangerous weather, move camp, or go hungry. Winter did not invent desperation. It simply removed the comfortable options first. And then we reach the method everyone expects from the title: cannibalism. There is genuine archaeological evidence that some prehistoric humans processed other humans. At Gran Dolina in Spain, remains attributed to Homo antecessor carry cut marks, impact damage, and breakage patterns comparable to butchered animals. At Gough's Cave in Britain, much later human bones show cutting, percussion, and human tooth marks, while carefully shaped skull cups suggest behavior that was not merely an ordinary meal. These are not scratches that automatically appeared because archaeologists wanted a dramatic documentary. They are pattern modifications studied against experimental butchery and animal remains. However, one crucial fact is missing. Neither assemblage proves that starving people ate companions to survive a winter. Cannibalism can involve nutrition, violence, ritual, mortuary practice, or several motives at once. The bones reveal what happened to bodies, not the weather, inside the minds of the living. That distinction matters because a sensational story can outrun its evidence. If food vanished during a severe winter, survival cannibalism was biologically possible, just as it has been in some documented disasters from later history. But possibility is not proof. We cannot take every prehistoric case of cannibalism, add snow to the background, and call the mystery solved. The same caution applies to the claim that ancient humans hibernated. A study of bones from Cima de los Huesos in Spain proposed that unusual lesions reflected seasonal metabolic disruption similar to hibernation. It is a fascinating hypothesis, not an established human winter strategy. Other diseases and nutritional problems can affect bone, and humans lack the specialized physiology of true hibernators, so no. The reliable plan was probably not to crawl into a cave in November and set an alarm for spring. Even prehistory had ideas that sound better before peer review. The strongest survival method was less shocking and more demanding. Cooperation. One person could tend the fire while another repaired clothing, processed food, watched children, checked traps, or helped bring fuel from beyond the shelter. Knowledge mattered as much as muscle. People had to remember where herds moved, which slopes stayed sheltered, which plants remained edible, how weather changed, and how to keep a tiny ember alive. Food sharing spread risk because the best hunter could fail tomorrow, and the injured gatherer could possess the skill that saved everyone next week. This does not mean every group was peaceful or every vulnerable person was protected. Prehistoric life included conflict, scarcity, and choices we cannot reconstruct. Yet a hearth surrounded by repeated work is evidence of a system, not a lone hero. The group survived by turning many fragile individuals into one flexible network. That may be humanity's oldest winter technology. So, did ancient humans use dark methods to survive winter? Sometimes their solutions were literally dark. Smoky shelters, night-long watches, and carcasses stripped until even the bones surrendered their fat. Some human remains prove that cannibalism occurred, but connecting those cases specifically to winter starvation would go beyond the evidence. The everyday answer was harsher and more impressive. People killed dangerous animals for fur and calories, burned precious material for a few more hours of heat, accepted smoke and exhaustion, planned far ahead, and relied on one another when plans failed. They survived not because cruelty made them strong, but because intelligence made almost nothing useless. Even a broken bone could become food, a tool, a wall, or fuel. Thanks for watching. If this journey into prehistory made your modern winter feel slightly less inconvenient, like the video and subscribe to Ancient Origins. Your heater deserves the appreciation.